Let's shift it to English now.
Yeah. Hello. I'm very pleased that José Jorge de Cravalho accepted my invitation to talk to me and to us today. And he's professor in the Department of Anthropology in the University of Brasilia. And I invited him because he's leading a wonderful and very beautiful project that has been pioneered here in Brazil, and I think it might be a great contribution to universities all around the world. So you may have the question. I mean, why I'm talking to an anthropologist? This is supposed to be a channel for ecological economists. And the answer is that, well, it's a very personal answer, is that I think that we have a lot to learn. We, as I'm talking about the academic community in general, but more specifically in the community dealing with sustainability issues, we have a great deal to learn from other way of being in the world. And I think that one of the main contribution of Brazil to the world is precisely that other ways of being in the territory are still very much alive here in Brazil, despite the expansion of the agricultural frontiers and mining frontiers. There are still places of resistance, of different way of dealing with the natural environment, and this population has been here before the conquest of the Portuguese and the Spanish. I'm talking about in general in Latin America. So it's part of our social cultural diversity, and therefore for me, Brazil, and that's one of the main reasons I came to live in Brazil, is a place for learning, and the world can learn a lot from Brazilian experiences. And José Jorge is leading a very interesting project precisely about what they have called the meeting of knowledges. And so this is a project that has to do with the inclusion of other way of knowing in the universities, and public universities more specifically. And I think that's one of the main innovations I have seen in universities all around the world during the recent years, and that's why I invited him to share the experience with us. But I think it's applicable in any place in the world, actually. So thank you very much again, José Jorge, for accepting the invitation. And I would like to start asking you about your personal path, your personal and professional path, and where are you from, where were you raised, and what have you studied? And I know that you have passed across different fields and different research interests, and maybe you can summarize for us very briefly about your history.
Well, thank you, Roldan. It's wonderful to have this dialogue with you. Yeah, since we met in Venezuela and so many years ago. Well, I am from a small town in the state of Minas Gerais, Ipanema, in Minas Gerais. Then I studied in Ouro Preto, Black Gold, the Baroque, one of the Baroque cities of Brazil, and then University of Brasilia. From Brasilia, where I studied music, I moved to Caracas, where I studied ethnomusicology. That was perhaps the greatest impact of my life, was really the years in Venezuela, the years in Caracas. In the Inter-American Institute of Ethnomusicology and Folklore, the INIDEF. That was a wonderful moment because we're a group of researchers from all over the Latin American continent. So we made also a bond for all our lives. And our plan was to make this great archive of the musical and performance traditions of the entire continent. So many of us would do this. We did these research missions in the different countries and managed to organize this big archive. It was Venezuela itself, I did research in Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, and I had friends from different countries. So from the INIDEF, what I learned as Brazil is very isolated in Latin America, is to see the big world of the Latin American continent and be connected with it. And this, as you say, this diversity, which is a characteristic of our continent. It's really strong. And parallel to it, even at that time, I was studying, since in Brasilia, Oriental religions and philosophy, on Tao Te Ching and Confucius and Buddhism, Sufism, Hinduism. All the time I had a connection with Oriental studies, especially poetry, philosophy, until today. But these were two things that were together. And after Venezuela, I did my MA and my PhD in Belfast, in the Queen's University of Belfast, Northern Ireland. I studied with John Blacking, who was an anthropologist who used to live in South Africa, at Witwatersrand. And there he used to be one of the leading professors against apartheid. And then he was banned from the country because of the anti-apartheid struggles at the time of Steve Biko. So Belfast, although remote, it was like a center in Europe of the anti-apartheid movement. That was 5 years in Belfast with John, ethnomusicology, anthropology and ethnomusicology. And then I came back to Brazil and for the Department of Anthropology, because the departments of music are even more insulated. It's just Western music that is taught in them. And immediately I understood how isolated racially we were. Completely different from Venezuela. Venezuela, for me, is the least racist country in Latin America. It's the most integrated, perhaps Uruguay too. But if you think even the Andean countries, the racism against the indigenous people is very high, and against Black people too. So I was in a department that looked like a South African during the apartheid. All white professors teaching all white students. I was in this for some years, until there was a crisis when came a student from Bahia, a Black student, to study with me. And then there was an incredible crisis, a racial crisis, because he was failed in a discipline that was obligatory, so he would lose the course. Was stunned by that, and the situation was very impossible to accept. And then I discovered that he was the first Black student we had in 20 years of the graduate program. It's too much a coincidence. So that led to a great struggle, a really traumatic situation with our colleagues that lasted quite some time. Ari, as he's called, almost lost his course. It was most 2 or 3 years. So we got a struggle that led to the academic council, the higher council in the university, until they forced our department to approve him. So it was clear that that was a case of discrimination. So because of this situation, I got the idea of proposing quotas for Black students. I mean, if it's so hard to get one, then we had to have many, to see if some of them at least finish, because the environment is an absolutely racist environment. So we started with this, and then what we in some countries, like in the USA, they call affirmative action. Here we usually use the word quotas, because it's 20%, for instance. That's what we started in Brazil. It's a percentage, and the number of us for indigenous peoples. So the struggle for quotas lasted the entire first decade of the country. We started in 1999, 2000, and it was increased all over those years, all over the country. Then we did I made a map of affirmative action, a map of all the varieties of quotas. But then to arrive to the meeting of knowledges was the fact that the number of students, Black and indigenous students, Maroon students, and poor students entered at the universities, but the curriculum continued to be the same Eurocentric Western curriculum when it was only white students studying. So the Afro-Brazilian traditions didn't appear in the curriculum. The entire indigenous traditions didn't appear. So it was monoepistemic and monocultural to correspond to a time that it was monoracial and monoethnic universities. Now we had a multiracial and multi-ethnic undergraduate student, but the curriculum was the same. That's why we moved in 2008 when the National Research Council. So I was to answer you, I was in Brasilia, University of Brasilia, all these years, and struggling for a while then for the quotas, and then in 2008, the National Research Council made this call, this what's called the greatest call, no, official call of the entire history of the CNPq. It's called the National Research Council, to fund, to organize National Institutes of Science and Technology, INCTs, NICTs, National Institutes of Sciences and Technology. That will be the top of the research groups in the country. So we applied for that. There are 102 of these National Institutes of Science and Technology. Most of them are really hard sciences and hard technology, nanotechnology, vaccines, and all the areas of engineering, computing, really high tech and high science, and a small group that's called applied social sciences. So we applied for one of them. It's called Institute of Inclusion in Higher Education and Research. That was connected, first of all, with the quotas, the fact that quotas is a public policy of inclusion, racial and ethnic inclusion. So we applied for, and were successfully won the institute. And immediately, you can interrupt me if you want, or if I can just, anytime if you want.
Go ahead. It's okay. Very interesting because you are making the link between your own life and the project. That's very interesting.
Well, because as Freud used to call there's an Unheimliche, this feeling of familiarity and strangeness, because I went to study with John Black and to study anthropology and ethnomusicology. Only when I was in Belfast, I learned that he had been expelled from South Africa because of the anti-apartheid struggles. Then I came to Brasilia to be an ethnomusicologist and anthropologist. As years coming, the sense that there was something wrong, which is the apartheid that I was now living in the University of Brasilia. And then when came the first Black student, they just exploded. So on my own way, separate from John, I had to start a struggle, an anti-racist struggle proper to the academic world in Brasilia. So when the National Institute of Science and Technology started, there was another area that is connected with the INIDEF, with my time in Venezuela, which are the popular cultures, as we call them here, the traditional cultures of the traditional communities. It's an immense variety. It's a very rich, world of traditions that we have in Brazil. Some are Afro-Brazilian, some are we call mestizo, syncretic. It's beautiful. So the Ministry of Culture was then having public policies for those popular cultures, and they called them mestres and mestras, the female and male masters. The word master in English doesn't capture the richness of meaning of the word mestre. Is the one who knows, the one who is a researcher, the one who is a leader of a community. Is a kind of a wise person too. Leads to wisdom, to spirituality, as well to science, technology. It's a beautiful word, mestres. So as soon as we get the institute, we made an agreement an official accord with the Minister of Culture, not with education, with culture, to open a space for the mestres at the university, because the mestres demanded that. So the meeting of knowledge came really from a demand from the mestres. In those two great meetings that we had in Brasilia in 2005 and 2006, they all, one of their great demands was to enter to teach. So I devised really in the year 2009 this project that then I called the Meeting of Knowledges, that, okay, the mestres will come to teach in a regular course with credits for the students. It's not an extension, it's not an outreach program, it's a regular. Why? Because that will give full legitimacy to their knowledge. If they are really knowledgeable people, they have to teach and be recognized by the students as we are, acknowledged as knowledgeable people. So that's why the Meeting of Knowledge is always regular courses. So we opened this course, and the Meeting of Knowledge began then in 2010 with support from the Ministry of Culture. I think that will close more or less, like if I can finish in one word. We started with racial and ethnic quotas for racial and ethnic groups that were excluded. With the Meeting of Knowledges, we now have what I call epistemic quotas for non-European knowledges, from non-Western European knowledges. This is the basis of the Meeting of Knowledge.
Wonderful, very nice story. And yeah, some years ago, I was shocked when I met a professional percussionist, here, a Brazilian percussionist, and she told me, she went to the university, to the conservatorium, and she told me that there was no, she couldn't study Brazilian percussion, and I couldn't believe it. How is it possible that one of the countries with the richest percussion cultures in it, is not teaching, that culture in the universities? I was very shocked about that. There was something very wrong, because I think percussion in Brazil is so important part of the, of the culture. If it's not taught officially in the curriculum, then it means that the curriculum is completely detached from
yes.
not only from reality, but also from history, and just the rooted. Something has to be done about that, of course. And that's why I found also your page wonderful, because it's at least I think a window for or a door open and to acknowledge our own culture. That's and it has to do, of course, with proud, with identity, with looking at ourselves. What we are. So my question, I have a curiosity, because you studied Xangô do Pernambuco, do Recife, in your PhD. So maybe I was just curious because it's not very known, so I wanted to know a little bit more about it, and how maybe you can make this connection between Afro-Brazilian culture, music, and academic education. Because you went there as an anthropologist, and therefore with an anthropological background. I don't know what kind of your approach was, but I guess you were like still a Western researcher looking at cultural practices from a kind of Western point of view. And I'm interested to know, just to close this first part, about how that research changed your life or changed your approach towards research, and whether it was part of the learning about the Afro, Afro-Brazilian culture was part of your, let's say, somehow transformation, I guess. Yeah, according to your recount, you experienced some kind of transformation that it was related to your work as researcher. So maybe you can tell us a bit more, just very briefly, what Xangô de Pernambuco is and how it impacted your life.
Well, one of the reasons why I went to study with John Blacking, because he was an Africanist, an ethnomusicologist of African music. From the INIDEF, from Caracas, I did the research on the Xangô cults of Recife. Many times, many years I was there. Yes, it's another world, because the Xangô is part of the Yoruba tradition in Brazil. One of the centers of the Yoruba tradition is in Bahia, it's called Candomblé in Bahia. And the Yoruba has two lines, as we call nations, the Ketu and the Ijisha nations. In Recife, they were mainly from the Igbas of Nigeria, and it's called Xangô. Xangô is one of the Orishas, is one of the gods, right, of the Yorubas. But exactly because it was so popular, people used to call the whole cult as Xangô. It's not pejorative, although some of them are using now the word candomblé, because then you understand more. So the Afro-Brazilian religions, that's another amazing, impressive tradition in Brazil. Really great, and they are all over. Practically all the capitals, all the big cities in Brazil have some variety of the Afro-Brazilian religions. The style of the Xangô is connected with, used to be the neighboring states of the Northeast. Paraíba and Alagoas also have some variety of the Xangô. And the Xangô is a world, is another worldview. I was really deep into it, in singing the songs, learning the repertoire, the rituals, the cowrie shells, the divination system, which is very strong. This is studied, right? But for instance, now it's changing, but when I began at the University of Brasilia, in those years that was really like an apartheid, a racial apartheid, it was an epistemic apartheid, because Afro-Brazilian studies was very, very, very fragile in all the universities. Anthropology in Brazil was more ethnology. The study of the indigenous peoples was always much stronger than the study of the Afro-Brazilian peoples. So the study of the Xangô is still very, very, it's not so diffused, so expanded as studies of indigenous groups, for instance. So what it gave me was another perspective of this curriculum. You were said that you were impressed by the fact that your friend didn't study percussion. No, ours, that's why I didn't go to any school of music. They are 100% Eurocentric. It's just European classical music, usually from the 1600 to the 1900, even doesn't come into the 20th century. This is a pattern. Now, only recently did they start with courses that they call popular music, but it's still Eurocentric popular music. You know, the commercial popular music. The traditions of the candomblés, of the Xangôs, of the percussion never enters. The meeting of knowledge is exactly to expand this narrow horizon in all the areas. I think what you captured, it sounds strange. I know it sounds strange. I will finish perhaps by saying, I don't know if people maybe outside Brazil don't have this idea of us. We are a very diverse country. There's no doubt about this, an amazing traditional cultures. But our universities are extremely Eurocentric, extremely monoepistemic. They are just replica of European and now of North American universities. It's just a Humboldtian model applied. So the real change came with the meeting of those, I dare to say. Our plan is to move from a monocultural, monocentric, monoracial, monocultural university to a pluriepistemic, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual university. This is the goal of the project.
Nice that you talk about that. Now we come to the core of our talk. That is the meeting of knowledges, and I like that. Wow, it's very important that the two words. I think it's a meeting place. So at least there is an expectation of horizontal relationship. Yeah, ideally, I guess, and also I like the word, the fact that the word knowledge is used in a plural sense. We talk about knowledges, so that means that different way of knowing are acknowledged. So I think it's a very nice word, very nice title for the project. Maybe you can summarize for us what the project is about and how is it organized, since when it has been running, and also a bit about the future. I mean, what are your plans for the future, and also a bit about your assessment and about the project during these years.
Well, we started the first discipline. I was in the first course, and I was in 2010 here at the University of Brasilia. With the agreement with the Ministry of Culture, which was also promoting the diversity, they asked us to invite masters, male and female, from the 5 different regions of the country. That's because Brasilia is the capital, and it would be a pilot exercise in the project. So we devised the model, which is very common in many universities now, which is a course with modules, with 5 modules. In the first one was 5 modules, sometimes with 4 modules. So a master, a mestre, or a mestra will come to teach for 2 or 3 weeks their knowledge, her or his knowledge. And we devised what I call the lecturer partner, professor parceiro, a partner lecturer. We will be together with the master in the class. This is, I invented this methodology, right? This pedagogy, which is specific of the meeting of knowledge. Why? Because you need to make a dialogue. The meeting of knowledges gives the protocol. We divide the protocols for dialogues. For instance, came a master from the Xingu area of the indigenous peoples of the state of Mato Grosso in the Amazon, a master who is an architect, who built those wonderful gigantic houses of 45 meters for 10 meters high. It's an amazing collective house that he built this house with no hammer and no nail, just by bending the trees, like bending the woods and so on, and with those knots, the different kinds of knots and secondary pillars and so on. It's an amazing architecture. So he's an architect, he's an engineer because he builds it. So he came as an architect, say. So we invited a professor from the Department of Architecture, Jaime Almeida, who deals with bamboos. He's learning, he's inventing processes with bamboo. He was the partner professor with Manua, Kamayura, from the Kamayura indigenous people. And he would make the dialogue. Sometimes he would translate, say, part of the architectural model of the indigenous with Greek models, with Renaissance models. So the world of the 2 epistemes could start to dialogue. There came another one who was one of my, I think, I admire so much, Luceli P, who was a Maroon. Maroon, there are Maroon slaves. In Brazil, there are still thousands of Maroon communities. Those communities of the called runaway slaves, those who fled from the plantations and lived in the forest and survived and now are free. So she comes from a Maroon community, and her grandfather, she's the 5th generation of the learners of the specialists in plants, medicinal plants. Luceli is an encyclopedia. She knows the medicinal capacity, the power of 450 different plants of the Cerrado, of this biome here where we are. And so she has a florestal, a yard grove in where she lives, that she had those 550, plus 350 of what she calls exotic medicinal plants that came from Europe, like romarans and others, from Europe. But she has all this, the Cerrado. So she came to teach the medicinal plants. Then we brought a professor, a colleague from pharmacy, from the course of pharmaceutics, to dialogue with her. For her, the plant is a living being, whereas for the pharmaceutic, it's just an active principle that you pick up after you dry the plant. So that she's doing the living plant, and we, with our Cartesian epistemology, are doing with dry plants, with dead plants in a way. So this is the first model. We repeated the meeting of knowledge, inviting different masters to 11, 12, 13. Then in the year 14 was really the great transformation. The Minister of Culture helped us again, gave us another award to expand the project for more 5 universities, to reach 5 universities. That was great, because then we went to the University of Minas Gerais in the year 2014. We did it in Brasilia. We didn't do it. It was the only year we didn't open the meeting of knowledge in Brasilia, so that we could articulate in others. So University of Minas Gerais is a quite powerful university, as you know. The University of Juiz de Fora, that's another one near Rio de Janeiro. University of Pará in the Amazon, the Ceará in the Northeast, and then came a 5th, the south of Bahia. Only in that year, the number, the amount of knowledge that came was just multiplied what we had. Because, for instance, just to come close even to idea of ecology, the south of Bahia has many traditional peoples. So the professors of the university, the lecturers, visited the different traditional communities to choose and dialogue which master they would come. So they would come Maroon masters from the Afro-Brazilian religions, or Candomblé and so on. Those, even the numbers is quite complex. Agro Ecology, various masters of Agro Ecology. River communities are called ribeirinhos, those who live collecting from rivers, collect marshes, and mangrove collectors, or called marisqueiros, those who live in this biome, which is the Atlantic forest, no? Like the mountain that are close to the sea, so you have the forest, you have the marshes, the mangroves, and you have the river that comes here, and then you have the sea. It's a very rich environment with a very rich tradition of knowledge. Some of those mestres of marisqueiros and mateiros, those who know those biomes, came to teach. What the universities offer is much less than that. I'm not disrespecting my colleagues. I'm just saying they teach what they learn from the traditions that they gathered from the United States, from England, from Germany, from whatever, but they haven't incorporated the knowledge of all the masters of those biomes. So the number then, even to come closer to what you're saying, then it increased in 1215. It appears in the UF. No, in the Rio Grande do Sul, one of the other great universities in Brazil, the deep south, no, of Brazil, the URGS, that became Black masters, indigenous masters. In 2016 came UF, where you are. Amazing, the same thing. All the traditional peoples of the state of Rio de Janeiro came. The Caiçaras, who is another wonderful traditional people. The Caiçaras, they live in the coast. They have a proper architecture. Jangadeiro, they have their rafts, tradition of of constructing of boat construction, which is proper to them. A relationship with the way of planting and agroecological principles of collecting and extracting from the environment. They came from Maroons, indigenous. So then we came after Fluminense, which is near Rio, in Diamantina, in Minas. That's another area with other technologies. So as we as we have like 15 universities that have the meeting of knowledges in the Roraima, where the Yanomami are, and the frontier with the border with Venezuela. They opened it in 2017 for 2018. Then you come indigenous peoples, all the different groups. Just to give you an idea in terms of what we have now, I can show the indicators of it. 14 different indigenous languages have been spoken in universities since we started with the meeting of knowledges. We used to be a monolingual academic environment. Now it's not. Plus Kimbundu, plus Yoruba. And the traditions are opening. So it is sciences, technologies, arts, spiritualities, especially because they are not separated. Right? I mean, a master, an artisan is also maybe also that dominates a technology, dominates a geometry, a science. So the protocols of knowledge, the epistemic protocols are increasing all the time. I just finished briefly with the expansion, saying that Colombia in 2012, with a colleague who is Venezuelan, Juliana Flores, but she lives in Colombia for some years. From the Javeriana, Universidad Javeriana of Bogota, we did a meeting of knowledge there in the doctorate, in the PhD program of cultural studies. Very similar to the way we did it in Brasilia, with the indigenous architect, Afro-Colombian master, very similar. In Ecuador, the Ministry of Culture will now apply the meeting. That's very nice, because there will be the meeting of knowledge in high schools, as we call the guardian schools, a beautiful name, instituciones guardianas, the guardian schools of the Afro-Equatorian traditions. We start with 7 schools, 7 guardianas, 7 guardian schools, to teach the Afro-Equatorian curriculum, right, with the Afro-Equatorian masters. The University of Vienna, Austria, the MDV, the University of Music and Performing Arts of Vienna, included the meeting of knowledges last year. I opened the course in October and did the last class of it in January of this year in the master's degree. And now the students are, because the same as you say, Austria has a very powerful European tradition in music, probably the #1, the MDV. But you have the minorities there that are not included, as you say, your friend that couldn't study percussion here. Therefore, the Roma people, what they call the gypsies, the Roma people is very powerful, but they are not into the MDV. The Croatian, who have that, the Slavs, the Turks. So what they call minorities, the Austrian minorities, will now teach at the University of Vienna. As you say, the dilemma of you can interrupt me if I am advancing too much. My view is the Western Humboldtian model of university started in Europe, in practically globalized the world, the continent. In all the 5 continents, we have variations of this Western Humboldtian model of university. Wonderful things came, but in all of them, there was an exclusion, an epistemic exclusion. It looked as if the Western knowledge, as you say, the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment knowledge would have answers for everything. And it was somehow more sophisticated than local knowledges. Now we have to decolonize this model, because it's not the case. We can now say that, for instance, if you take any area like a pharmacy, medicinal plants are as powerful as the model of the big pharma model. Even now with COVID, we have various indigenous groups who are protecting themselves with COVID with their own plants. You can do this with architecture. You can make this answer that this knowledge, this Western knowledge is not final. It is not complete. It cannot be isolated because it is incomplete, actually. So we have to return to a model that is pluri-epistemic. The meeting of knowledge is this. And I don't know, I can stop and you can answer another question. I would like to go to ecology, but maybe you can start.
No, wonderful. I like very much that you used many examples that are very interesting, and normally they are the subject of research of ecological economists. So all the examples you were mentioning are very relevant for our field, from architecture to the use of natural resources to the also the commercial or health use of plants, and so all of these are the subject of our ecological economics. So that's why I decided to invite you. And I wanted to ask you more about the possible tensions between the methods. So recently, for example, I was listening to Makota Valdina, and I think she's a my descent that participated in your program.
Makota died 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Makota Valdina, no?
Sim.
But it was Makota Kidoyale from the same tradition of Angola, of Minas. But Makota Valdina, yes.
Yeah.
She died 2 years ago, yes.
Mm-hmm.
A great master.
Yeah. And she said, I was very interesting because she was somehow comparing the Western way of learning with the Afro-Brazilian way of learning in the Mediterranean, in the Candomblé. And she was saying that these two ways of learning are very different. And she said that in the Terreiro, you listen a lot, you don't talk too much. You don't. She was specifically talking about questions. In the Terreiro, you don't pose much questions. Now, you are not supposed to pose much questions. You learn by listening, by getting involved, by waiting. So she was also talking about the time. And the notion of time for learning is she said, is very different in the Terreiro compared to the university. And I think one of the particularities of the university as a system is the time. It's very rigid time frames in which you have to fill with content. And so I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, also in the university, it's very important confrontation and questioning and criticisms, and posing questions is a very important part of learning. Well, at least it should be. So just this example for the kind of tensions that might happen between the different way of learning. So I wanted to know more about your experience with that one. So because it's very difficult, I think, to teach in a system that has also a way of transmitting knowledge which is completely different to your own. I mean, for example, indigenous people in Brazil have a very strong oral tradition, so orality is extremely important, while in the Western world, written knowledge is the key. And we have, because I participate, as I told you, in this IPBES reports. This IPBES is equivalent to IPCC for biodiversity, and there is an attempt within IPBES to consider non-Western knowledge in this kind of reports. And a big challenge is that there are strong tensions between the way of transmitting knowledge and what is considered good quality knowledge in the Western science, and what is considered good quality knowledge in other systems. For example, as writing a report, we as authors are obliged to to make systemic reviews of the literature. So the literature has to be peer reviewed, has to be published, and then the review has to be very systematic, and therefore it automatically excludes anything that it cannot be written cannot be read. So if that's the starting point, it creates a very big barrier that makes it extremely difficult to. Also, it's a written report and something like that. So how to include, for example, oral traditions in written reports. This has been a very big challenge for IPBES. And so I wanted to know more about how you dealt with that, with those tensions in the project.
Well, the tensions, so far, I don't see they are very high. What I see is we don't have many, I don't see many options. The model that we have so far, it's proved to be insufficient. It's not enough for the amount of knowledge. It doesn't reflect the wealth, the richness of knowledge of the country. It's the same would be Venezuela, Colombia. It would make no difference in African countries, Asian countries. I would leave for a moment European countries, say. As you say, the diversity here is too big. So either we move to a kind of a hybrid university model that incorporates orality as part, as a founding part, as specialized literacy is, or we then, there's an alternative. You build other institutions outside it. For instance, there are some now indigenous universities in the continent. Huh? There are some, even in Venezuela have, Colombia has some, Peru, they call intercultural indigenous university. That's one model. I mean, I'm very much connected with Amal Taiwasi, the intercultural indigenous university of the indigenous of Ecuador. But then you don't incorporate the great amount of the Western knowledge that you have. So what we do, say, with the University of Fluminense, where you are, or here in Brasilia, in Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro, should we simply abandon all the libraries we have, all the laboratories we have, all the implements, all the amazing, archive of knowledge, and start to build something from ground zero? If someone wants to do it, that's okay. That's please do it. My idea is to move it. It has to be an institutional break with the present model. When people say about the decolonize the curriculum, that's a kind of a, the roads must fall movement in South Africa, at Witwatersrand, no? They started to just destroy the statue of Rhodes. Now they are in Oxford with this problem because there is a statue there, no? And Oxford is feeling like they have to move otherwise it will be a shame for Oxford if the students just pull that statue down and so on. Okay, what about the curriculum of Oxford University? How are we going to decolonize that curriculum? So if you can now come to the tensions, what Makota Valdina is saying is that the masters come and they try to transmit their knowledges within their own pedagogy. There are various pedagogies among them. Some of them tell stories. Students are not used to learn complex and intricate stories. They have to pay attention. The cell phone won't help. The Google won't help. You have to really try to memorize the complexity of the story, of the myth, and so on. So, as you say, we are becoming amnesic people. People don't have long memories anymore, no capacity of memorizing. So the oral transmission is part of the meeting of knowledges. Either we incorporate these knowledges, we incorporate orality, or then they will be excluded. I am accepting the challenge of making it. So the tension actually is not so much because the masters have a more, as I call, polymaths. They are transdisciplinary. Our knowledge is still very much disciplinary. they incarnate transdisciplinarity. So by teaching one aspect, they incorporate the other aspect. Technology goes together with science, go with art, aesthetics, symbolism, they all come together with narratives. And a more holistic, if you want, a more holistic, the way of apprehending it. Now, what you say about systemic review, peer review, this cannot be the only parameter for knowledge. Some of the papers, some of the publications of the meeting of knowledge just appeared in journals that have no ISBN. Why should they have? When we started with quotas, there was no field of learning, which is called quotas in Brazil. Now we have an institute in the National Research Council. They had no precedent. So should I write? Well, I cannot write in the United States or in England about quota because, hey, you are not quoting this and this. Why should I quote these people if they are not connected with what I'm doing? If you want really to innovate, you cannot go at the idea of good quality is another one. Systemic review, peer review, go for the established knowledge as far as I understand. If you want really to innovate, you have to somehow not abandon, but you can renounce the good results of being writing only to peer review journals and write to other kind of journals because of this. I don't know if I am. What is the meeting of knowledges is basically oral traditions, and apart from a difference in the epistemology, what I call the word now is epistemologies of the living cosmos. We are promoting and starting a protocol of dialogues of our actual epistemology of an inert and the dead cosmos that comes from Descartes to an epistemology of the living cosmos. The living cosmos, the various of epistemologies of the indigenous, the epistemology of the candomblés and not the epistemology of the living cosmos of the other traditional peoples. The tension, we have to wait and see how we deal with them. I don't think it's so much, you know why? We cannot force anybody to do the meeting of knowledge, to start meeting of knowledge. We don't induce it, as I say. We are just open, some university enter in contact at the end, and then I discuss with those professors and see, let's see how we can start the project in your university, only through the interests of the people who want to do it. You cannot force someone to invite masters. What sort of relationship would that be? If they don't agree with that, they'll be ill-treated. The master will be ill-treated by colleagues who don't like them. So, you know, the tension will be from the exclusion, not because once they are inside. And I am more optimistic because I think, why is the meeting of knowledge is growing? Maybe it's a zeitgeist. Maybe it's somehow connected with the spirit of the time. That this model of university that corresponds to a model of a declining civilization, which is ours, is demanding alternatives. The alternatives of the living cosmos. If I could just show you one small thing from the time of ecology. The Yanomami, which is from your part of the world too, from Venezuela. Né? I have various baskets of the Yanomami. Look at this. Look at this amazing circle. Inside it, look at how it is inside, no? You know, here. It's an incredibly perfect object. Look here. Now, this is cipote chica. It's a specific kind of knot, no? From the Amazon. They know exactly the moment to pick up this cipó, what they call cipó, a kind of a knot, no? That is ripe enough not to break, but not ripe enough to break, but still not green enough to close. Women only with the hands, they make this amazingly perfect piece of technology, sitting on the ground with no artifact around, no machine, nothing, with the entire mental, you know, the mental shape of this object in their minds, and with their hands, perfect art craft to do it from the center, to make it like this, and to make this sense of diagonal. That's a result absolutely impeccable. Here you have then aesthetics, technology, science, biology, you know, environment, equilibrium, state of mind, because the resources that you have to do this are very, as you could call, precarious. You may be with a baby, you know, she must be feeding a baby and still doing this. So we have many of those. They come from a living cosmos. All the time I look at these pieces and think, and I have to show, I have to remind myself that I didn't buy it in any shop. They are not technological pieces. They are artisanal, they are technologies, yes, but they're not industrial pieces. So if you bring this and it becomes a new perspective, the entire realm of the way we organize knowledges in universities will be expanded. I don't want to say to destroy anything. My idea is just to expand it, to make it bigger than it is now. And oral traditions will come, because this is all passed orally. As you say, Makoto was saying, you listen, you observe, you hear, you see, right? You develop your touch with your hands abilities, your body abilities. The meeting of knowledge is as I say, my pedagogy is pensar, sentir, fazer. A word that I invented. Imagine a language where the word thinking, feeling, doing will be only one word. Thinking, feeling, doing. Pensar, sentir, fazer. Because there is thinking here, there is thought here, there is feeling, and it is doing. And this is just another one, just to show you. This is from your ecological. This is another wonderful piece from Roraima, too, from the Macuxi and the Wapixana. The Macuxi are in Venezuela, too. No? This is called the Juana. Let me see. Can you see it here? The Juana is the following. You know the Bunichi trees. The Bunichi is a palm tree that you have from Minas Gerais up to the north of Brazil. There are near lakes. Now you have this Bunichi. It's a tall, like 40 meters high, and with many, it's a palm tree with the leaves. This is one only leaf from the Bunichi. They pick one leaf, cut it here, and the leaf is here, as if the tree is telling you, listen, I am about to make a basket. If you just help me, you just lace it around, then you have one. So this wonderful and perfect basket that you can see here. Then they pick one part of the leaf here and knot it, tie it from his side, and the other one from the end, so that you have there is nothing extra and nothing less than one palm tree. I can hardly imagine in which other part of the world there is an object equivalent to this. If someone who sees this knows of anywhere an object similar to this, please, I'd love to see it. This is, for me, an example. What I say that we have closed ourselves from our environments all the time, even for the reproduction of life, for the seeds, for the plants, for the food, and so on, and also from technology, from science, from aesthetics. What I see in those 10 years of the meeting of knowledge is in a plethora, is an amazing presence of people who knows things that we cannot even imagine that people would know. The unknowing is what we it leads us here.
I like very much that you talked about this trilogy about thinking, feeling, and doing. Because
Not with end, not with end.
Yeah.
Thinking, feeling, doing.
It could be a single word.
Yeah, single word, yeah.
Because I think this binary worldview of the West, I think is at the core of the environmental crisis. Now I have published a recent paper talking about that. Because in the Western way, and the Western world in general, but especially in the Western way of knowing, you separate, well, first of all, feeling from thinking, and also at university, traditionally you separate doing from, doing from thinking, and even in the, this separation between the mind and the body, which is very extreme in the case of academicians, because they spend the whole day in front of the screen. So for me, that's one of the most interesting contributions of the Afro-Brazilian culture and indigenous culture in general, that in Brazil, that is the, you know also with the body. Body is a very important part of the process of learning. Yeah. And that's very, very clear in the Terreiro. You cannot learn without the body. Exactly. But it's shocking difference with the university, where even in the architecture, because the way people see it is very passive and still, and you never participate with your body in the learning process. We have to finish in some minutes. I have just final questions. Maybe you can talk about. The first is about the categories we choose. We have this dilemma also for these international reports that try to be more inclusive. Talking about sometimes they call it very often they are called indigenous and local knowledge, or indigenous people and local communities. But I feel a very strong discomfort with these categories, because I think because they are still colonial words, they are colonial categories. It's the same as the same applies to the word black. Who invented these categories were the Europeans, the whites. There is it's very strange to divide the world between indigenous and not indigenous people, or between local people and what else are the others. Who is not local? Everybody's local. So for me, it's very fluid in this category. For example, local communities. Who is not part of a local community when we are all part of local communities? So I wanted to ask you about this, how you dealt in the project with the categories you choose to define what you do, because the categories I think are very important in order not to reproduce with the language, like with colonial worldview. I think more specifically about the word indigenous, because for example, if we talk about indigenous people in Latin America, all these words are like colonial, like indigenous first, because the people were before the whites, and Latin, because Latin was not a language here before the Europeans, and America, of course, it's because of America that also very extremely colonial name for a continent. So we have this paradox in Latin America, how to call ourselves. And so my question about how you dealt with that, these dilemmas. And my last question is about how to choose the so-called masters. And yeah, I just wanted to tell you a story. Before the pandemic, I was just working at my university, and I started to see some groups and for students discussing, and I didn't know what was it, and then they asked them, and they told me that they were very young students, and they were a group of biblical studies. I mean, it's like evangelical students. And for me, it was very shocking because I'm not used to it. I mean normally you don't associate the university environment with biblical studies, but you know well about the rise of Protestant churches in Brazil, and now they represent about 30% of the population. And well, they are a very important part of the population in Brazil. So I was thinking, oh well, I mean, what is the, because eventually you could also invite people from from Christian churches to be masters, or which and I mean, for the Western tradition of the university, would kind of anathema, because the academic community always confronted, and well, I mean, traditionally has been in conflict in Europe, especially, I mean, against the church and religious interpretation of reality. Well, especially during this, I mean, 16th century, 17th century, was much more clear. The story about Galileo, etc. So there is a difficult history between the church and Christianity in general, and universities. And in the US, for example, there was an attempt of churches to teach creationism at universities. And so my question is well, is about these tensions again, about who decides who can be considered a master, and because still I think the power is on the university professors, right? I mean, like they are who decide who are the masters, who the masters are. There is still, of course, a structural power imbalance between professors and masters, in the sense that that professors can decide, right, who to invite. A master cannot invite themselves to participate at university if they don't have a kind of support, right? So these are the two last questions, and then unfortunately we have to finish the talk.
Well, as to who invites you, if we invite, I will just remind that we started by saying there were those big national seminars for public policy for the popular cultures. The masters demanded to enter schools to teach. So the meeting of knowledge is a way to answer their demand. They demanded us. We were what you could say, we were outdated. We didn't realize from ourselves alone that our knowledge was limited, that you had excluded the knowledges of the indigenous, of the Afro-Brazilians, of the Maroons, or all the traditional peoples. They reminded us that, hey, you have excluded us. We want to be part of this and teach that. So the first pressure came from the social movement, as you could call it, the masters themselves, with their supporters and so on, researchers and others. So just to start, as the meeting on knowledge started as an answer to that. Since we had, first of all, started to answer the demand for inclusion of the young Blacks and the young indigenous with the quotas, now we are trying to answer the demand for epistemic inclusion. That's the first. Now, as we decide, of course, we have a power as being part of the university. We can forever be inviting then people from Europe to teach here in the United States and never invite any master. We are trying to share this and move this environment from a from a pluriepistemic environment. We have to start somewhere, even starting, as you say, with a certain degree of the difference in power. But that's the only way it is possible. I cannot see another way. So I think that's more or less the way I would answer it. I have a paper where I have an essay where I discuss it minutely. Who is the master? The master is recognized by their communities. Other people have done research many times in those communities and acknowledge who are the masters of those traditions. It's a name that traditional communities call themselves, an equivalent of the word for master. Amauta, for instance, in Quechua, or Yachar, like the Japanese sensei sometimes, or Sifu in Chinese, or Malu in Igbo, Babalawo in Yoruba. I have many names. I have studied that and said, so we are not inventing this word. Actually, it was Pierre Hadot, in the ancient world, you have also the wise men, you have the masters. Philosophy started with those masters. Then they become academic philosophers. So you somehow are connecting with the origins of our traditions. So that's it. As you say for words, I understand what you say. I don't use local communities. Indigenous, that's it. In English, it's not the same as indigenous. Indigenous in English means what we could say in Spanish, if I am right, pueblos originarios, the original peoples, right? For instance, now they opened an Institute of Indigenous Peoples in Australia, University of Melbourne. It's a friend of mine, Aaron Korn. In December, the 1st of December, we were together in a symposium in Taiwan, and he was opening it. But the Australian original pueblos originarios, they are called Aborigines. It's another word, but they accept the word Aborigines. So the Institute will be indigenous, in this sense of indigenous being those original peoples, not the Western who came later. As in Canada, they will say First Nations, if I'm right? In Canada, they call First Nations, which is equivalent of what we call in Brazil, indigenous. So when you say in English, indigenous, if I translate for the traditional peoples of Brazil, let me speak more slowly. With the word indigenous in English, I would translate in Portuguese, os indígenas, 305 different indigenous nations, speaking at least 180 different indigenous languages, different languages from each other, from the Portuguese. The Maroons communities will be indigenous, the Caiçaras, many of those marisqueiros, faxinais, pantaneiros, vazanteiros, many of those traditional peoples will fall into the category of indigenous. But the fact is, the association, the National Association of the Indigenous Nations in Brazil are called indigenous. So they accept the word, so we were accepting it. You understand that you are thinking globally if those categories. I think, Roldan, every word is polysemic, and one must more or less accommodate and accept even certain imprecision in words. I don't think we will have a precise solution, a word that would really capture everything. We have to avoid words that are really discriminating or really improper. A local community local knowledge, I don't use this. I would say knowledge of the Maroons, of the indigenous, of the traditional candomblés, our name, which is, that's why it's there. I
like the word nation. I like that is used in Bolivia, for example, which is plurinational, it's a state.
Plurinational.
Also,
I would like
Brazilian tradition, they use the word nações.
Nações, I like that. 305 nations, but yeah, the Coiabe is the association of the indigenous of Brazil. So they use the word indigenous.
Yeah.
So they accept the word. The last one about the Galileo and so on, I know I'm finishing, but I don't listen. There is one thing here. The model of the Humboldtian University came after the Enlightenment. It's already absorbed the great battle that you mentioned, that's a great story, of Europe, and so the formation of the scientific revolution. The fact is, from our point of view, when they excluded religion from university because of dogma, to avoid dogma, another step was taken that was not necessary to be taken. They excluded spirituality. Spirituality is not the same as religion. Religion can be dogmatic. Spirituality is always an individual way. I cannot force you to meditate, right? There's no way I can force you to have an interior life that's connected, with the spirits of nature, with spirits of the water, of the plants and nothing. You do it on your internal path. The point is, the masters that we invite, they are all spiritualized people. So how you do? Then you're not supposed to invite them. They all are either shamans. Some of them are shamans, so they are connected with the spirits. The ones who are masters of the Afro-Brazilian religion, they are connected with the Orishas, they are connected with the Encantados, with the spirits of the lakes, and so on. We don't need to expel spirituality in order to be plural and respectful of the traditions. No one is going to impose their spirituality on others. They just can exercise them. So you can have a plural spiritual environment. I don't see it incompatible with science. Rupert Sheldrake, the campus morphicus, or the morphic resonance. Sheldrake was in India doing meditation for years. He says that he is not in what he called the scientific materialism of the 19th century. We don't need this. We can have a university that incorporates. They don't have to be secular in this almost fundamentalist. Oh, he's meditating. Let's expel it from the university. He's not supposed to meditate here. We don't have to be this sectarian. We can accommodate. But those evangelicals, well, this is Eurocentric. We are talking about non-Eurocentric traditions. The Bible. We have a theological seminars in the literature. You have studies of Hebrew and everything, and Aramaic, and all the translations of the Bible into Greek. Well, we have this already. There's nothing new in this. So I separate. This is religion, really. What we say with the master is the spiritual word that comes with it. And the cosmos is a living cosmos. If the cosmos is alive, the cosmos is speaking, right? It's sending messages, and the masters are part of the people who are engaged in this conversation with the cosmos. And so must we be, I think. This has nothing to do with sectarianism. This has nothing to do with Galileo and the Vatican.
Well, I just wanted to thank you again, and it was a wonderful interview. I have learned a lot, and you are a full master. We have to acknowledge that. We are very grateful for the work you are doing, and I just wanted to congratulate again for your wonderful project. I think it is one of the most innovative projects I have seen recently, and for sure it will be wonderful to see it replicated in Latin America and Africa and Asia and all over the world. I think the university environment will be much richer and nicer from all point of view, in terms of diversity, but also in terms of aesthetics, art, and worldviews. I mean, and I think that well, I think that we're in a kind of civilizatory decline. I mean, the Western civilization is probably coming to the end, and that's in part because of the environmental crisis, and it has generated a tremendous environmental crisis in terms of biodiversity loss and climate change. And so today is more urgent than ever to look at other ways of understanding the world and being in the world. So that's why I think your project is something that should be known all over the world, and I hope this interview can also help that to disseminate it. Well, thank you very much for the interview again, and I hope to see you physically soon.
If I could just summarize in one message,
Sure.
one phrase, I would say that we're this environmental crisis, civilizatory crisis, and we are, all the intellectuals and academics of our time, are trying to think models, alternatives, and so on. The message of the Mitico is that we should listen to the other peoples who have already alternatives for this civilizatory crisis. And we should then listen to them and think together alternatives for all, and not continue thinking alone within ourselves for new alternatives without listening. This would be the main message.
Also, I took Renak, he said that they have already experienced several times the end of the world, so they have survived. And even the pandemic, I mean, of course,
yeah.
The population that were here before the arrival of this Portuguese experienced the greatest pandemic in the history of humanity, and they survived. So we have a lot to learn. Well, thank you very much again.
Thank you.